Alongside arguably only nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers are the hot ticket item that any major military power craves more than any other, as they have the ability to be plonked anywhere on the globe and reduce anything that either its captain or the politician paying his mortgage happen to find irksome to rubble. Currently, a mere 10 nations operate true carriers, those capable of operating fixed-wing aircraft, with a further 6 operating still impressive but undeniably lesser helicopter carriers, and among these nations, one in particular does stand out. It was the UK who invented aircraft carriers all the way back in 1918, when whoever was wearing the big shiny hat at the time smashed a ceremonial bottle of champagne over the bow of HMS Argus, the first ever true aircraft carrier, and pushed her out to sea for the first time. Well, since then, despite some stiff competition from some new kids on the block here and there, they've remained the pioneers of the type, operating them more or less constantly since that fateful day. The latest addition to this lineage, most lofty, is the Queen Elizabeth class, a pair of top-of-the-line carriers that have Blighty's baddies quaking in their boots as they are reminded that Britannia still rules the waves. Or, well, so patriotic headlines would have you believe, because, well, others hold quite the opposite opinion, that they're actually complete junk, a colossal waste of taxpayers' pounds that have little strategic utility and are about as much real use as a chocolate teapot. Today, we're going to be getting to the bottom of the matter as we explore their history, design, and above all else, the reasons that some hold them in such poor regard. So let's get cracking. Hello everybody, if you use an iPad like me, I've got something truly game-changing for you, and that is Paper-like Screen Protector 2.1. Now look, if you're tired of the old glassy feel of your iPad and want to bring the magic of paper to your digital canvas, look no further. Paper-like is the OG paper feel screen protector that's got millions of creators around the world hooked. I put this thing on a few weeks ago, they sent me one for free, very kind of them, and as much as I like drawing on it with the pencil, perhaps my favorite thing about it is just the way it makes the screen feel. It even makes a nice sound when you touch it. There's no more like fingerprints going all over this thing. And then when you do write on it, you guys won't be able to hear it. It sounds exactly like paper, which is probably why they call it paper-like. You just draw on it like that. It's awesome. It doesn't even reflect things too much for my camera. What is it? It's perfect! Yes, it is! It's all possible because of something called nanodot technology. These tiny microbeads make your Apple Pencil dance on the screen, mimicking the feel of pencil on paper. I have to say, just a little note from me here. I thought when they first were going to send this to me, I'm like, yo, Apple thought about this. They did the iPad. They made it perfect already. And I was a bit skeptical. And I was wrong. I really like this. It's just matte surface, just feels nicer. It's just better. This isn't your run-of-the-mill protector, it's a Swiss masterpiece. Paper-like 2.0 is a plastic foil with nanodots embedded. It's crafted in Switzerland by experts with over a century of experience. Probably not exactly making iPad covers because that would be way longer of a time, but somehow they have that. Plus, it also acts as a protector so your iPad's not gonna get scratched up, which is nice. Plus, there's different bundles so you can combine them to make the ultimate digital experience. Upgrade your iPad like I did, it's surprisingly affordable. It's just really nice. It's just nice. I just keep wanting to do that. Thank you to Paperlike for the sponsorship today. All you need to do is go to paperlike.com/megaprojects, join the revolution. It's awesome. Just get one of these. There's a link below. And now back to today's video. The decision to construct the Queen Elizabeth class, the largest warships ever built for the Royal Navy, was announced in July 2007, with the contracts being signed in July 2008. Intended to replace the Invincible class, a class of 3 1970s vintage carriers that, come the noughties, were ironically anything but invincible, the Queen Elizabeth class was to be a significant upgrade in size, capability, and versatility, as well as being capable of deploying the mighty F-35 Lightning II. HMS Queen Elizabeth, the leadership of the class, and HMS Prince of Wales had an initial budget of just over £4 billion for the pair, but given the often undersold nature of British military procurement, this soon rocketed up to just over £7.5 billion come 2019. It's apparently gotten even heavier since then too, but more recent figures are hard to come by. The construction process of these ships was a nationwide effort and involved multiple shipyards across the UK. For Queen Elizabeth, her construction began in 2009, with major sections of the ship being built in 6 different shipyards and assembled in Rosyth Dockyard in Scotland. This work took a fair old while, and she was eventually commissioned in December 2017. Prince of Wales shared a similar construction story, with her construction starting in 2021 and also taking 8 years, with her being commissioned in November 2019. Both displace approximately 72,000 tons and have a length of just under 300 meters, figures that put them at just under 3 times the displacement of the Invincible class that they replaced. And it also just nudges them into the supercarrier category. Being such big girls, they naturally carry a not inconsiderable air wing, consisting of up to 24 F-35s under normal circumstances and up to 36 in more extreme cases, alongside a cheeky few supplementary Merlin helicopters to serve in both the utility and airborne early warning roles. For context, this is roughly a third of the number of aircraft that the American Gerald R. Ford, the current king of carriers, can carry, but note that the Ford also displaces nearly 30,000 tons more than a Queen Elizabeth carrier. To help get all of that in the air, the Queen Elizabeth class utilizes a large flight deck equipped with a ski jump and has no catapult capabilities, as you may initially assume a carrier of its size would, and do remember that detail because it's important later. As for defense, both ships are equipped with 3 20mm Phalanx close-in weapon systems that provide both anti-aircraft and anti-missile coverage at short range, as well as 4 30mm DS-30M Mark II automated small-caliber guns and an array of 12.7mm M2 Browning machine guns for defense against surface threats. All of these are hooked up to an advanced sensor and radar suite that includes the advanced Artisan 3D radar and S1850M long-range radar, which allow them to operate at peak efficiency and, touch wood, afford the ships a half-decent level of protection. Power comes from 2 Rolls-Royce Marine Trent MT30 gas turbines and 4 diesel generator sets driving 2 electric motors. It is not nuclear-powered, as people might initially suspect. This setup affords a top speed of over 25 knots, which notably is a bit slower than other diesel-powered supercarriers such as the Chinese Fujian, which boasts a top speed of give or take 30 knots, and similarly is also slower than most nuclear-powered supercarriers, with the American Gerald R. Ford and Nimitz class capable of hitting roughly 30 knots. Queen Elizabeth quickly moved into a rigorous phase of operational testing and training following her commissioning. By February 2018, all appeared well, and she was then moved to the first phases of operational training, which included initial sea training programs, heavy weather testing, and helicopter certification processes. This period also saw her first overseas port visit to Gibraltar. This was certainly a most triumphant situation, but it was more than just a glory cruise, as the jaunt was also used to test her integrated systems during longer voyages and to also conduct her first ever replenishment at sea, something her crew had to get their heads around were she ever to be a serious deployable military asset. Then in the autumn of 2018, she embarked on her first significant deployment, Westland 18, a training exercise that took her across the Atlantic and saw her put her first planes into the sky, as well as practice her interoperability with allied NATO forces, particularly the Americans. All in all, this went well enough. No planes crashed, and the Americans seemed chuffed enough with her performance. What more could Her Majesty want from the Navy? As for Prince of Wales, she started undergoing sea trials in April 2021 and achieved full operational status in October 2021. She then participated in an international exercise off the coast of Scotland. This exercise was notable for involving joint operations of both Queen Elizabeth-class carriers, and once again, things seemed to go fine. No disasters, no stress, no bother. 2021 would be a landmark year for the Queen Elizabeth as she embarked on a maiden operational deployment known as Carrier Strike Group 21 or CSG-21. This deployment took her across the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and into the Indo-Pacific region, where she partook in a series of diplomatic visits and joint exercises with partner nations. This included operations and exercises with the US, Japan, India, and several other countries. The piece de resistance of Queen Elizabeth's actions as part of CSG-21, however, would be her actions against ISIS as part of Operation Shader, the UK's contribution to the US's own Operation Inherent Resolve, their war against ISIS. Operating in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, the carrier's air wing conducted a series of precision strikes against ISIS targets. These operations were aimed at degrading ISIS's capabilities and supporting coalition ground forces, and were significant not just for that, but also for being the only time that a Queen Elizabeth carrier has launched its planes in anger so far. All in all then, this doesn't sound too bad, does it? Pretty standard stuff. So why do some call the Queen Elizabeth class a boondoggle? Well, stay tuned, because in the footnotes of that overview lies a whole other potential story, one that is, well, just a bit worse. Where did it all go wrong? How did a class of ships with a performance seemingly so adequate, if not outright good on paper, come to be swamped in controversy? Well, the first criticism was financial, as many believed that the UK simply cannot afford supercarriers. This might sound odd at first, because after all, the country is the 6th richest on Earth by nominal GDP. But such a figure, which is often selectively chosen by patriotic yet blinkered analysts, hides an uncomfortable reality. The country's economy is fucked. And there's no other way to say it. This becomes apparent if one steps away from GDP and takes a look at some other economic indicators, chief among which is poverty, which is currently exploding in the UK. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation, a very old charity that conducts and funds research aimed at solving poverty in the UK, paints a rather bleak picture of this, highlighting the fact that over 22% of the British population now lives in poverty, which includes 8.1 million working-age adults, 4.2 million children, and 2.1 million pensioners. What's worse, due to the interesting way the British economy has been managed in recent years, the Foundation estimates that this figure is only going to get worse in the coming years, with them estimating that come the close of this year, 12 million adults will live in poverty. Such figures are just the tip of the iceberg, however, as hidden within those figures, according to the Foundation, are 6 million people in so-called deep poverty, which they define as earning below 40% of the median income. Further still is destitution, defined as a state in which one is not able to meet their most basic physical needs to stay warm, dry, clean, and fed. Currently in the UK, by Foundation figures, 3.8 million people, including 1 million children, live in that state. Given this, many pundits in both the UK and abroad, and we suspect many of you in the audience now, question how the hell the country can stand to put the cash up for 2 such expensive military toys when the home front, so to speak, is in such dire straits. I mean, you could feed a lot of hungry children with that money. But criticism of the Queen Elizabeth class goes beyond just fiscal prudence, as there are many that argue that they aren't even that good as carriers and represent a massive waste of money, regardless of the amount of starving children currently trying to survive in the land that the ships call home. One major such criticism has been over a supposed vulnerability to advanced anti-ship missiles, particularly those developed and fielded by nations such as Russia and China. These missiles, designed to evade radar detection and penetrate defense systems, pose a significant threat. The carrier's primary defense against such threats is their escort ships, with onboard countermeasures such as the Phalanx close-in weapon system that we discussed earlier playing a secondary role. It has no defensive missiles. One problem with that approach is that the UK doesn't really have escort ships, not enough anyway, which has severely limited the Royal Navy's ability to deploy the carriers. And do note also, a modern carrier lacking ship defense missiles is not normal. The Gerald R. Ford, for example, has both RAM-162 and RAM-116 defensive missile launching systems for handling inbound aircraft and missiles before its escorts even have to get involved. And just to really drive this point home, it actually isn't particularly normal for older carriers either. The USS Nimitz, commissioned all the way back in 1975, also carries RAM-116 rams in addition to RAM-7 launchers, and the Charles de Gaulle, a French carrier commissioned back in 2001, which isn't even a supercarrier, sports both Aster-15 and Mistral missile launchers. This one really is a head-scratcher. You gotta think, when everyone else is incorporating defensive missiles, maybe it'd be a good idea. And speaking of things the UK can't afford, F-35s, the plane that is meant to fly off the carriers. Bear in mind, as we discussed earlier, each carrier can take 36 of them in total if they really squeeze them in. The Royal Navy surely must have acquired at least 72 of them in the last 17 years since the carrier's construction was announced. Right? Well, let's answer that by playing a little game. Take a moment to think and have a guess at how many you think they've got. Got a number in your head? Well, good. We can reveal that the UK currently has 30 F-35s. 30 is not even enough to fully stock a single carrier to its absolute maximum, and it's just enough to fill a single carrier to its nominal complement. Bear in mind, too, we said the UK has 30 F-35s, not the Royal Navy. This wasn't a slip of the tongue on our part, that's how many the whole country has, so that number is also shared with the RAF, and we mean literally shared, as the Ministry of Defense regularly swaps its F-35s around between branches depending on which one is in most dire need. So bad is the F-35 F-35 situation, in fact, that on every deployment the Queen Elizabeth has been on, the Americans have had to lend some of theirs just to be able to put it to sea with even a minimum complement. This sounds pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, how could a major developed military power blunder so catastrophically? Well, at least there's precedent, because regular viewers of this channel will be aware of how uniquely terrible the UK has always been when it comes to matters of military procurement. After all, this is the nation that willingly destroyed a top-of-the-line indigenous fighter, the TSR-2, just to get allegedly scammed by General Dynamics for a deal on F-111s that was too good to be true. They sent their troops into Iraq in functionally unarmored Land Rovers and issued a helmet, the Mark VI, that prevented its wearer from aiming their rifle while prone if they happened to be wearing body armor. The UK really does not have a good track record with this stuff. And look, while we're on the topic of things the Queen Elizabeth class should have but doesn't, let's talk about catapults. The decision to completely forego catapults of either the traditional steam variety or the newer electromagnetic sort was influenced by one thing and one thing alone. And you know exactly what that issue was, because this is British military procurement we're talking about. It's money. Instead, the Queen Elizabeth class uses a good old-fashioned ski jump. Bear in mind too, steam catapults aren't exactly an alien technology to Britain. They have been using the technology since 1953, when they first fitted one to the HMS Perseus. The absence of catapults on these carriers is a major limitation. This isn't like a nuclear versus turbine propulsion, with merits both ways depending on how you look at it. No, not having catapults is an objective detriment. Without catapults, carriers are severely limited on the types of planes they can carry and the payloads of the planes that they can launch. A prime example of this, the F-35C, the proper vertical takeoff capable F-35 that also has a greater fuel capacity, combat radius and payload capacity than the F-35B that the Royal Navy ended up with. Well, they could have had that instead, but alas, using that variant really means you have to have a catapult to use it to its maximum potential. So, no, didn't work well, but at least, they saved a few quid. There are plans afoot to retrofit the Queen Elizabeth class with catapults, however, which the Navy wanted from day one. And that is basically British military procurement. A person with loads of medals wants a thing, politician says it's too expensive, and they'll go for the other thing instead. The aforementioned medal-laden person points out why the other thing is stupid and won't work. The politician says we're doing it anyway, and then it inevitably turns out to be so the Ministry of Defense then spends more money correcting the problem than if they'd just done it correctly the first time around. And then there are the reliability issues. Worst plagued by these by far is Prince of Wales. In August 2022, she experienced issues related to her starboard propeller shaft, which halted its intended voyage across the Atlantic for exercises off the US eastern seaboard. Then in February 2024, when she was due to head off and replace her sister in Exercise Steadfast Defender, a large NATO exercise, her departure was delayed by almost a week due to reasons that we've yet to be informed about. These are just two examples. A Freedom of Information request released by the Ministry of Defense revealed that she has spent a total of 33% of her commission time in Portsmouth undergoing maintenance. We know that aircraft carriers are just a tad complicated and so require a bit more maintenance than a Toyota Corolla, but 33% of the time? For real? But while the Prince of Wales has been the most unreliable of the class by far, Queen Elizabeth hasn't exactly been without mechanical gremlins either, as she encountered a mechanical issue just days before her scheduled departure for a high-profile NATO exercise in February 2024 due to problems with a shaft coupling on the starboard propeller shaft. So then, are the many arguments against the Queen Elizabeth class enough to warrant their damning, or does the strategic utility they provide despite these issues means that they were still a smart use of British taxpayer money? Well, we don't know yet, but with time, we'll find out.